Icelandic Sagas, Volume 3. The ORKNEYINGERS Saga. 1. There was a king named Fornjot. He ruled over those lands which are called Finland and Kvinland. That is to the east of that bight of the sea which goes northward to meet Gandvik. That we call the Helsingbight. Fornjot had 3 sons. One was named Hlur, whom we call Ager, the second Logi, the third Kari. He was the father of Frost, the father of Snow the Old. His son's name was Thori. Thori had 2 sons, one was named Nor and the other Gor. His daughter's name was Goi. Thori was a great sacrificer. He had a sacrifice every year at midwinter, that they called Thori's sacrifice. From that the month took its name. One winter there were these tidings at Thori's sacrifice, that Goi was lost and gone, and they set out to search for her, but she was not found. And when that month passed away, Thori made them take to sacrifice, and sacrifice for this, that they might know surely where Goi was hidden away. That they called Goi's sacrifice, but for all that they could hear nothing of her. 4 winters after those brothers vowed a vow that they would search for her, and so share the search between them, that Nor should search on land, but Gor should search the outskars and islands, and he went on board ship. Each of those brothers had many men with him. Gor held on with his ships out along the sea bight, and so into Alan's Sea. After that he views the Swedish scars far and wide, and all the isles that lie in the East Salt Sea. After that to the Gothland scars, and thence to Denmark, and views there all the isles. He found there his kinsmen, they who were come from Hlur the Old out of Hlur's isle, and he held on then still with his voyage, and hears nothing of his sister. But Nor his brother bided till snow lay on the heaths, and it was good going on snowshoon. After that he fared forth from Kvinland and inside the sea bight, and they came thither where those men were who are called Laps, that is at the back of Finnmark. But the Laps wished to forbid them a passage, and there arose a battle. And that might and magic followed Nor and his men. That their foes became as swine as soon as they heard the war cry and saw weapons drawn, and the Laps betook themselves to flight. But Nor fared thence west on the keel, and was long out, so that they knew nothing of men, and shot beasts and birds for meat for themselves. They fared on till they came where the waters turned to the westward from the fells. Then they fared along with the waters, and came to a sea. There before them was a firth as big as it were a sea bight. There was a mickle tilth, and great gales came down to the firth. There was a gathering of folk against them, and they straightway made ready to battle with Nor, and their quarrel fared as was to be looked for. All that folk either fell or fled, but Nor and his men overcame them as weeds over cornfields. Nor fared round all the firth and laid it under him, and made himself king over those districts that lay there inside the firth. Nor tarried there the summer over till it snowed upon the hearths. Then he shaped his course up along the dale which goes south from the firth. That firth is now called Drontheim. Some of his men he lets fare the coast way round Maren. He laid under him all whithersoever he came. And when he comes south over the fell that lay to the south of the Dalabite, he went on still south along the dales, until he came to a great water which they called Josen. Then he turns west again on to the fell, because it had been told them that his men had come off worsted before that king whose name was Sockney. Then they came into that district which they called Valders. Thence they fared to the sea, and came into a long firth and a narrow, which is now called Soun. There was their meeting with Sockney, and they had there mickle battle, because their witchcraft had no hold on Sockney. Nor went hard forward, and he and Sockney came to handstrokes. There fell Sockney and many of his folk. 2. After that Nor fared on into the firth that goes north from Son. There Sockney had ruled before in what is now called Sockney's Dale. There Nor tarried a long time, and that is now called Norfirth. There came to meet him Gor his brother, and neither of them had then heard anything of Goi. Gor too had laid under him all the outer land as he had fared from the south, and then those brothers shared the lands between them. nor had all the mainland, but Gor shall have all those isles between which and the mainland he passes in a ship with a fixed rudder. And after that Nor fares to the uplands, and came to what is now called Hyde Moor. There that king ruled whose name was Hrolf of the Hill. He was the son of Svadi the giant from north of the Dovrefell. Hrolf had taken away from Kvinlandkoi, Thori's daughter. He went at once to meet Nor, and offered him single combat. They fought long together and neither was wounded. After that they made their quarrel up, and Nor got Hrolf's sister, but Hrolf got Goi to wife. Thence Nor turned back to the realm which he had laid under him, that he called Norway. He ruled that realm while he lived, and his sons after him, and they shared the land amongst them, and so the realms began to get smaller and smaller as the kings got more and more numerous. And so they were divided into provinces. 3. Gor had the isles, and for that he was called a sea king. His sons were the Hiti and Bedi, they were sea kings and mighty overbearing men. They made many inroads on the realm of Nor's sons, and they had many battles, and now one, now the other won the day. Bedi ran into Drindheim and warred there. He lay where it is now called Beatsia and Beatstead. Thence he made them drag his ship from the innermost bight of Beatstead, and so north over Eldunach, that is where the Noundales come down from the north. He sat himself on the poop, and held the tiller in his hand, and claimed for his own all that land that then lay on the larboard, and that is many tilths and much land. Hiti, Gor's son, was father of Svadi the sea king, the father of Halfdan the Old, the father of Ivar the Uplanders Earl, the father of Eystein the Noisy, the father of Earl Ragnvald the Mighty and the Wise in council. 4. Earl Ragnvald joined Harold Fairhair when he seized the land, but he gave him lordship over both the Marne and Romsdale. He had to wife Ragnhilda the daughter of Hrolf Nosy. Their son was Hrolf who won Normandy. He was so tall that horses could not carry him. For that he was called Ganging Hrolf. From him are come the Ruenjarls and the English kings. Their son was also Ivar, and Thorir the Silent. Ragnvald had also base-born sons. Their names were Halid and Herlog and Einar. He was the youngest. Harold Fairhair fared one summer west across the sea to chastise the Vikings, when he was weary at the peacelessness of those who harried in Norway in summer, but were in the winter in Shetland or the Orkneys. He laid under him Shetland and the Orkneys and the southern isles. He fared west to as far as Man, and laid waste the tilths of Man. He had there many battles, and took as his own lands so far west that no king of Norway has ever owned land further west since. And in one battle, Ivar, son of Earl Ragnvald, fell. But when King Harold sailed from the west, then he gave to Earl Ragnvald, as an atonement for his son, Shetland and the Orkneys. But Earl Ragnvald gave both lands to Sigurd his brother. He was one of King Harold's forecastle men. The king gave Sigurd the title of Earl when he went from the west, and Sigurd stayed behind there in the west. 5. Earl Sigurd made himself a mighty chief. He joined his fellowship with Thorstein the Red, son of Olaf the Whitened the Deep-Minded, and they won Alcaithness and much else of Scotland, Moray and Ross. There he caused to be built a burg southward of Moray. These two agreed between themselves to meet, Sigurd and Melbrick de Tuthi the Scot Earl, that they should meet and settle their quarrel at a given place, each with 40 men. And when the day named came, Sigurd thought to himself that the Scots were faithless. He made them mount 80 men on 40 horses. And when Melbrick got to see them, he said to his men, "Now are we cheated by Sigurd, for I see 2 feet of a man on each horse's side, and the men must be twice as many again as the steeds that bear them. Let us now harden our hearts, and let us see that each has a man for himself ere we die." And they got ready after that. And when Sigurd saw their plan, he said to his men, "Now half of our force shall get off horseback and come on them in flank when the battle is joined. But we will ride at them as hard as we can, and break in sunder their array." And so they met, and there was a hard battle, and not long ere Melbrick fell and his followers. and Sigurd caused the heads to be fastened to his horses' cruppers as a glory for himself. And then they rode home, and boasted of their victory. And when they were come on the way, then Sigurd wished to spur the horse with his foot, and he struck his calf against a tooth which stuck out of Melbrita's head and grazed it. And in that wound sprung up pain and swelling, and that led him to his death. And Sigurd the Mighty is buried under a howe at Egilsbacka. Guttorm was the name of Sigurd's son. He ruled the lands one winter and died childless. And when Earl Ragnvald of Marn learned the death of that father and son, he sent his son Halid west, and King Harald gave him the title of Earl. And when Halid came west, he sat down in Grossi, but Vikings went about the isles and over in Caithness. They slew and robbed men. But when the yeomen brought their scathe before Earl Halid, then he thought it hard to right their lot, and he grew weary of the dignity. He turned himself out of the earldom, and took up his freehold right, and went back to Norway. And his journey was thought the greatest mark for mockery. 6. 2 Dansk Vikings sat themselves down in the lands. The name of the one was Thorir Treebeard, but the other's Calf Scurvy. And when Earl Ragnvald learnt this, he took it very ill to heart, and fetched before him his sons Thorir and Herlog. Hrolf was then out warring. Ragnvald asked which of them would go west into the isles. Thorir bade him see about his passage. So says my mind about this, says the Earl, that thy thriving will be most here, and thy ways lie not hence. Then Herlog asked, Wilt thou that I go? The Earl says, Not for thee will the earldom be destined, and the spirits that follow thee lie towards Iceland. There wilt thou increase thy race, and be a famous man in that land. Then Einar went forward, the youngest of his sons, and said, Wilt thou that I go to the isles? I will promise that I will never come back into thy eyesight. Besides I have here little good to part from, and it is not to be looked for that my thriving will be less anywhere else than here. The Earl says, Unlikely art thou for a chief for thy mother's sake, for she is thrall born on all sides. But true it is that I should think it all the better that thou go soon away and comest late back. Ragnvaldr gave Einar a ship of 20 benches fully manned. But King Harald gave him the title of Earl. 7. Einar sailed west to Shetland, and their folk gathered to him. After that he went south into the Orkneys, and held on at once to Mikkelf and his companion. There a battle arose, and both those Vikings fell. Then this stave was sung, he gave Treebeard to trolls. Einar slew Scurvy. After that he laid the lands under him, and made himself the greatest chief. He first of men found out how to cut turf out of the earth for firewood on Turfness in Scotland, for they were ill off for wood in the isles. Einar was a tall man and ugly, one-eyed, and yet the sharpest sighted of men. 8. When the sons of Harald Fairhair had grown to man's estate, they became most overbearing men and unruly within the land. They fell on the king's earls, some they slew, but some they drove from their earldoms. Snowford's sons, Helften Longleg, and Gudrid the Bright, fell on Earl Ragnvald of Marn, and slew him, and took to themselves his realm. But when King Harald heard that, he grew very wrath, and went out against his sons. Halfdan rushed on shipboard and sailed west across the sea, but Gudrid gave himself up to his father's power. King Harald gave Thorir as an atonement for his father, a loaf of Harvesteel his daughter, and the title of Earl, and all that his father left behind him. Halfdan Longleg came into the Orkneys, and as soon as it was known that a son of King Harald was come thither, then men became full of fear. Some became Halfdan's liegemen, but Earl Einar fled away out of the isles and up into Scotland. Halfdan laid the isles under him, and made himself king over them. Einar came back that same year, and he and Halfdan met. There arose then a great battle, and Einar gained the victory, but Halfdan leapt overboard in the dusk at eventide. Then Einar sang a stave. I see not from Hrolf's hand, nor Hrolog's eke, fly, dart on the foeman flock. Father, vengeance befits us. But while we the battle, this even urged on, Earl the rear and Marn, o'er mead cup sits mute. Next morning when it was light they went to look for renegade men among the isles, if any had got away, and each was slain on the spot as he stood. Then Earl Ager took to saying these words, I know not what I see in Renancy, sometimes it lifts itself up, but sometimes it lays itself down, that is either a bird or man, and we will go to it. There they found Halfdan Longleg, and Einar made them carve an eagle on his back with a sword, and cut the ribs all from the backbone, and draw the lungs thereout, and gave him to Odin for the victory he had won. Then Einar sung this, Man broad-bearded often is outlawed, many a one, for stealing sheep, but in isles here I for felling. Mighty Harold's youthful son, risk hangs o'er me, say the freemen. From the king so courageful, Harold's shield I've hewn a hole in, none can call that dint in doubt. And again this, ever am I glad since spears. Good 'tis daring deeds to do, spears of warriors fond of fight. Bid the boy son of the king, him I hide not they mislike. There flew grey across the isles, bird that feasts on body wounds, wounds of Halfdan, joy of hawks. After that he made them cast Halfdan's howe, and sang, Reeked I reckon Rumfel's death, right in this the Norns have shapen. Now the people's prop hath fallen, to my fourth share of revenge. Scatter stones ye listen lads, for a victory we have won. Scat to long legs here I scatter, scat of stones of grit so hard. And when this news was heard in Norway, then his brothers took it very ill, and vowed a vow to fare to the Orkneys and avenge him, but King Harold made them put off their voyage. Einar sung when he heard of their vow, For my life forsooth are many, eager, as I hear them say, mighty men of no mean race, from diverse mansions of the earth. But for that they do not know, these, until they lay me low, which of us the eagle's claws shall bow beneath their albior. But sometime after King Harold fared west across the sea and came to the isles. Einar fled away out of the isles and over to Caithness. After that men came between them and they made up their quarrel. King Harold laid a fine upon the isles, and bade them pay 60 marks of gold. Earl Einar offered to bring out the fine alone, and then to own all the allodial holdings, and the freeholders were willing to do that. For the wealthy thought they would be able to buy back their holdings, but the poor had no money to pay the fine with. Einar paid up the fine, and so it was long after that the earls had all the allodial lands, till Earl Sigurd gave back to the ORKNEYINGERS their allodial lands. King Harold fared back to Norway, but Earl Einar ruled over the Orkneys a long time, and died of sickness. He had 3 sons. One's name was Ordenkel, another Erland, a third Thorfinn Skullsplitter. When Harold the fair-haired breathed his last, Eric Bloodaxe was king 2 winters. Then came Hakon Athelstan's foster child from England, but Eric fared out of the land. He sailed west over the sea, and harried in Scotland and England. But when King Athelstan heard that, he sent men to Eric, and offered to give him some land. He said he had been a great friend of King Harold, and said that he would show that by honoring his son. He said also that he would set him at one with King Hakon his foster son. King Eric accepted this choice, and he gave him Northumberland to rule over. That is 1/5 of England. But for that, Eric had little land and many men. He grew short of money. For that he harried during the summers, but in the winters he sat at home on his lands. He kept on doing that while King Athelstan lived. After him his brother Edmund took the realm. He was not such a friend of the Northmen as King Athelstan. He thought it ill that Eric should have Northumberland. And one spring King Eric fared north along Scotland, and thence to the Orkneys, and took with him the earls of the Orkneys, the sons of Turfeinar, Ordenkel and Erland. Thence he fared to the southern isles, and there too he got a great force. Thence he fared to Ireland and harried, and he did the like in Bretland. Thence he fared to England, and there he harried as he had done elsewhere. Olaf was the name of the king whom Edmund had set there to ward the land. But for that Eric had a great force, he landed and went up away from his ships. Olaf also gathered an overwhelming force, and fared against King Eric, and there was a mighty battle. At the beginning of the day the Englishmen fell fast, but where one fell 3 came in his stead. But towards the close of the day the loss of men turned on the side of the Northmen, and the end of it was that King Eric fell and 5 kings with him. One of them was called Guthrum. There fell also the Earls Ordenkel and Erland, the sons of Turfiner. But when Queen Gunhilda and her sons were ware that Eric had fallen and that he had before harried the land of the King of England, they thought they knew that there was no hope of peace for them in England. So they busked them in haste for the Orkneys. Thorfinskull Splitter was the earl there. Then the sons of Gunhilda took the isles under them, and were there in the winters, but fared a warring in the summers. But while Gunhilda and her sons were in the Orkneys, they heard that there was strife between the king of the Danes and King Håkon Athelstan's foster child. Then they thought there was some hope that they might get help from Harald Gorm's son. Then they began their voyage to the Dane king. But before they fared out of the Orkneys they gave away Ragnhilda, the daughter of King Eric and Gunhilda, to Arnfinn the son of Earl Thorfinn. And then Thorfinn took up his seat in the Isles. 9. Thorfinn had 5 sons. The name of the first was Havard the Harvest Happy, the second was Hlodver, the third Ljot, the fourth Scully, the fifth Arnfinn. Ragnhilda Eric's daughter wrought her husband Arnfinn's death at Merkel in Caithness. But she gave herself away to Havard the Harvest Happy, his brother. Harvard took the earldom, and was a good chief, and in his days were good harvests. Einar Oily Tongue was the name of a man, Harvard's sister's son. He was a great chief, and had a great following, and went a-warring in the summers. He was guest at a feast at Havard's, and at that feast they, Ragnhilda and Einar, talked much together. She said such a man was well worthy to be a chief, and better fitted for the earldom than Havard, his kinsman. She called, too, that woman well wedded who had such a husband. Einar bade her not to take to such words. Said he was the noblest man in the Isles, and she full well wedded. Ragnhild answers, short henceforth shall be my and Harvard's wedded life. True it is that there must be men in the Isles who will not let everything grow in their eyes. Even if thou puttest aside the honor from thee. With such upbraidings Einar's mind turned to greed and guile against the earl his kinsman.